Welcome to the Awareness Program, an introduction to mindfulness meditation with Dr. Deborah Norris, presented by the Mindfulness Center, a 12-week virtual immersive introduction to meditation program for comprehensive mindfulness practices. Thank you for joining me for today's session, Session 1, Introduction to Mindfulness Meditation, Benefits and Physiology. I am Jessie Taylor, one of the co-founders of the Mindfulness Center and Director of Educational Programming. In today's session, we'll take a look at what mindfulness is and come to a working understanding of this term and what it entails. We'll take a look at the physiology of stress and relaxation and what's actually happening in our minds and our bodies in these different states of mind and being. We'll have an overview of mindfulness practices and techniques and what different practices and techniques entail. And we'll end with a mindfulness meditation practice using the breath to cultivate presence, mindfulness, and well-being. So what is mindfulness? I'm sure this is a term that you've heard before at this point, but it can encompass different definitions and different meanings to different people. So to take a look at several definitions here, firstly by John Kabat-Zinn, Professor of Medicine at University of Massachusetts. Mindfulness is awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. And according to Dr. Deborah Norris, founder of the Mindfulness Center and your creator of this program, mindfulness is a state of curious awareness of the flow of the environment around and within oneself. The keys to mindfulness are interoceptive awareness and self-compassion. So what does that mean? Expanding upon those definitions, mindfulness cultivates greater awareness of the unity of mind and body, as well as of the ways unconscious thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can undermine our emotional, physical, and spiritual health. So when we practice mindfulness, we cultivate an awareness of the connection and the unity, the oneness of mind and body. So when we're in a state of unhealthiness in our mental well-being, if we're stressed or experiencing anxiety or grief or loss or negative habits or self-perceptions or negative perceptions of the environment around us, this has a very real impact on our physical well-being. We experience sensations of stress within the body, discomfort in the stomach or tension in the body or pain, as well as other impacts on our physical well-being. But what we come to develop through mindfulness is greater awareness of that connection of the mind and body. And so in developing that awareness, we come to a more positive state of physical, emotional, and spiritual health. Also important is to understand that mindfulness is a practice. It's something that we develop through regular practice rather than just a one-time experience. So while you can certainly experience wonderful benefits from just a short practice of mindfulness or your very first experience in mindfulness, those benefits are further developed and become much greater through regular practice over time. In understanding what mindfulness is, it's helpful to understand also what mindfulness is not. So mindfulness is not striving or judging, reminiscing about the past, or worrying about the future. Because of course, most of the time when we're experiencing stress, this comes from not being present in the moment. It comes from worrying about something that happened before or that we anticipate may happen in the future. But in fact, we can't change what's happened in the past, and we can only affect the future through the present moment. So when we come to cultivate a greater sense of present moment awareness, present mindedness, we come to feel more empowered and to cultivate greater sense of well-being. Some mindfulness practices include, but are not limited to, meditation, yoga, breathing techniques, other relaxation techniques, mindful movement such as yoga and tai chi, and more. And towards the end of this presentation today, we will take a closer look at each of these techniques and what they entail. Mindfulness and research in this area has shown to improve a sense of relaxation, emotional resiliency, self-regulation, self-awareness, social skills, executive functioning, concentration and focus, and compassion. And subsequent sessions within this program will expand upon the research and evidence basis behind these further. So we'll take a look now at the physiology of stress and relaxation. What's actually happening in our minds and our bodies when we're experiencing a state of stress or relaxation, and how mindfulness plays a role here. So in understanding stress, it's important to understand that stress comes from fear and is meant to warn us of danger. It's a survival mechanism. You might have heard of the term of the fight or flight response. We experience stress when the mind interprets that something is a threat to our survival and reacts correspondingly. The mind is very good at that function, at reacting to what it's interpreting as a stressor and eliciting the stress response to help us survive that supposed threat to our survival. But the mind is not always very good at deciphering between what's an actual threat to our survival as opposed to simply a regular challenge in our daily lives. Part of this has to do with the way that our minds learn behavior, and particularly survival behaviors. Just as a baby isn't necessarily born understanding that hot means danger, but they'll certainly come to learn that. Our minds learn what in our environments are indications of threats, and then it learns how to react accordingly. And so in this way, stress can become a conditioned response. So an example of conditioning, you might have heard of the experiment with Pavlov's dogs. There was a scientist named Pavlov. And what he did was, every day just before feeding his dogs, he would ring a bell. And so over time, after a little while of doing this, he found that when he would ring the bell, the dogs would salivate. They had become conditioned to associate the ringing of the bell with being fed, and thus the ringing of the bell in and of itself, which inherently has nothing to do with being fed, but because of that conditioning, that ringing of the bell elicited this very real physiological response of salivation. And so in the same way, stress can become conditioned. When there's things in our environment that become associated with stressors, can by themselves elicit that stress response. So stress can become a learned and conditioned behavior. And so in addressing stress, one of the first and most important things to do is notice when we're experiencing a state of stress, and notice what in our environment might be eliciting that response. So simple things like the sound of our alarm clock going off in the morning. Who loves the sound of the alarm clock going off in the morning, right? But then right there from the beginning of our day, we can be coming right into that stress response. Same thing with things like traffic, just seeing brake lights up ahead, especially if we're in a hurry, that could certainly elicit a stress response. Seeing the sheer number of emails. None of these in and of themselves are an actual threat to our survival, but the brain is interpreting them in that way. It's also helpful to understand that just as stress can become conditioned, so too can mindfulness. So just as certain things in our environment might elicit that stress response, we can learn to condition a more mindful and relaxed response. And then we find when mindfulness becomes a natural and conditioned response, resiliency develops. So in that fight or flight response, we see a series of mechanisms throughout the nervous system aimed at immediate survival. And so it's important to note that that is immediate survival, not long-term well-being. And so you see in this image here, there's a little box on the side that says stress going into the brain. So some sensory input in our environment is being interpreted by the brain as a threat, whether it actually is or not. It's being interpreted as a threat. And then the brain is sending a message to the endocrine system, to our hormones, and throughout our bodies to respond accordingly as if there's a threat to our survival. And so in this fight or flight response, we see an increase in our breathing rate, our blood pressure, and our heart rate. But we see a suppression of the immune system, right? If we're needing to run or fight for our lives, we wouldn't necessarily need to be putting energy into fighting a cold. So this is the way in which this fight or flight response is boosting or putting energy into immediate survival, but not long-term well-being. We also see a decrease in bone formation, an inhibition in digestion, reproductive hormones, and memory. We see an increase in cholesterol and sugar in our blood for energy. If we needed to run or fight, we would want that sugar and that energy readily available. But of course, we can see how that could have an impact on chronic diseases such as diabetes or others. We see an increase in inflammation overall, which chronic inflammation has been shown to aggravate other chronic diseases such as arthritis, cancer, asthma, diabetes, and heart disease. And we see an increase in anxiety and depression overall. So stress, of course, is not something that just is not fun or not pleasant, but we see how it is actually something that's having a very real impact on our long-term health and well-being. But the good news is that we have an antidote to that. It's something called the relaxation response. So this is a term that was coined by Dr. Herbert Benson out of Harvard. What he found is that relaxation response is incompatible with the stress response. So we're either going into one or the other. We can't be going into both at the same time. So if we're experiencing stress and we find ourselves going into the stress response, we can use mindfulness techniques and relaxation techniques to help elicit that relaxation response, moving away from the stress response, moving away from all of these immediate survival mechanisms that we saw on this previous slide, and moving into a state of relaxation and greater health and well-being. And what Dr. Benson found was that many mindfulness techniques, or what we might call mind-body techniques, in fact elicit the relaxation response. And so in the relaxation response, physiologically, we see a balancing of hormones. We see that serotonin levels increase. We can think of that as the happiness hormone. We see endorphin levels increase. We can think of that as the pain-relieving hormone. We see melatonin levels increase. We might think of that as the sleep hormone. We see adrenaline levels decrease, the action hormone. We see norepinephrine levels decrease, the fight or flight hormone. We see that hormonal levels are rebalanced overall and immune function is enhanced. So when we look at what's actually happening in our brains and our bodies when we are in the stress response or the relaxation response or a state of mindfulness, it's helpful to understand what's happening in our brains. And in particular, in a study out of Harvard by Dr. Sarah Lazar and others, she took a look at neural imaging and what's actually happening in our brains when we meditate and practice mindfulness. And what she found from this neural imaging is that there was, in fact, with regular practice, a thickening of the prefrontal cortex and the right anterior insula. And so in this concept of neuroplasticity, we see that our brain has the ability to actually change its actual shape and density depending on how it's used. And so with this growth and thickening of the prefrontal cortex and in the right anterior insula, we see that these parts of the brains affect functions such as executive behavior, cognitive functions of learning, associative conditioning, memory and social functioning, rational, logical decision-making. Parts of the brain modulate our emotional responses and override automatic behaviors and habits. And so when we understand stress as something that can become conditioned, that certain triggers within our environment can be eliciting stress responses, even if they don't need to be, we see how stress in and of itself could become a negative habitual behavior. but that through mindfulness practice, we have the ability to actually change the parts of our brain that override automatic behaviors or negative habits, and thus helping us to modulate our emotional responses and our overall well-being. So now we'll take a look at some different mindfulness techniques and what each of these techniques entail. So deep breathing is listed number one in this list of mindfulness techniques because it was found to be a key factor in Dr. Benson's research when he looked at what practices and techniques can elicit that relaxation response. Deep breathing was found to be a key factor or ingredient in many different mindfulness or mind, body, or relaxation techniques. And this is because deep breathing itself is found to trigger the relaxation response. So our breath is very much indicative of our energy levels or our state of mind. Just as when we are in a higher state of energy or higher state of stress, our breathing might become more rapid. But as we become more relaxed or when we're asleep, our breathing becomes deeper and slower. And so we see how our breath is indicative of our energy level or our state of mind. But so too, our breath is causative of our emotional states. So if I were to tell you to start hyperventilating right now, that would actually induce a state of stress. But if I were to tell you to deepen and slow your breath down just now, that would actually induce the relaxation response. And so in this way, we have a very powerful tool to help us modulate our own emotional responses. The breath also uniquely is a unique function within our brains and our bodies in that it can happen both completely subconsciously. We don't need to think about the breath like we might need to think about something like, say, writing or driving or reading. The breath will happen even if we're not thinking about it or when we're asleep. But at the same time, we can exert control over our breath. We could hold our breath, for instance, if we needed to, like when swimming, or we could purposefully slow our breath down to help us relax. So we have a very unique ability to control our breath and thus, in that way, as I mentioned, to help modulate our emotional responses. We don't have this ability with other functions of our bodies, such as the digestion or the immune system. We can't necessarily say digestion improve or immune system improve, but we can in fact change our breath. So it's a very unique and effective tool in that way. So moving along. Meditation, of course, also at the top of our list of mindfulness techniques. But there are many different types of meditation. We'll be focusing on what we call mindfulness meditation throughout this program. But there's many different types of meditation. But what they have in common is that they all use a focal point to help calm the mind and thus promote the relaxation response. So in mindfulness meditation, we definitely use the breath as a main focal point. In other forms of meditation, they might use a sound, such as chanting. They might use an image, whether that image is called into the mind or it's something actually in front of you, like a candle. Other forms of meditation use movement, such as yoga and Tai Chi. But as I mentioned, they all use these focal points to calm the mind and thus promote the relaxation response. But ultimately, with practice, these techniques are no longer needed, and the practitioner can simply be in a state of mindful awareness without going through those techniques. So someone could be in a state of mindful awareness without, say, chanting or doing yoga movements, and could simply be in a state of mindfulness. So other mindfulness or mind-body techniques and practices, including yoga, Tai Chi, and other mindful movements, What we have in these practices and techniques is an opportunity to move the body and to be aware of these movements within the body as that focal point. So in fact, these become a form of moving meditation. And in this way, these practices are good for both the mind and the body. So they're not just good exercise, although they certainly can be, but they're good exercise as well as wonderful for our mental and emotional state of well-being as well. And one thing that I like to point out about yoga, being a yoga instructor myself, is that anyone can do yoga. I hear many people say, oh, I can't do yoga, I'm not flexible. And to me, that's like saying, oh, I can't go to the doctor, I'm not healthy, right? So we might become more flexible through doing yoga, but we certainly don't need to be flexible to start. I've taught yoga to people in wheelchairs, to people with cancer, to pregnant women, to athletes, to people in work sites and in corporate situations and seated around desks and conference tables. So anyone can do yoga anytime. And in fact, I would say that if you are in mindful awareness of your breath, you are doing yoga and you are meditating. So other relaxation techniques might include things like progressive muscular relaxation, which is wonderful for relieving persistent tension within the bodies. We can often hold tension in the body but not even realize we're holding it. If you've ever gotten home at the end of a long day and you finally get to flop down on the couch and you notice that your head is pounding or your back or your feet ache, even though you made it through a busy day without really noticing this. But once we finally relax, we begin to notice that tension that's being held subconsciously. So progressive muscular relaxation is a great technique for helping us to relieve and let go of that persistent tension that we might not have otherwise realized we were holding. Guided imagery is a great technique to using the imagination, calling an image into the mind, a relaxing image to help induce a state of relaxation. And of course, prayer has to be mentioned because this is probably the most widely used relaxation techniques throughout the world. And while mindfulness in and of itself is not inherently a religious practice, it's simply a present focused state of mind. For many individuals, it can become a spiritual practice for themselves personally. And so it's important to recognize the potential of prayer to be an effective mindfulness and relaxation technique. And so we'll come now into our mindfulness exercise. So I would invite you now to get comfortable, to uncross your legs, let your feet rest on the floor. If you're in a seated position, get comfortable in your seat or your chair. If it's an opportunity for you right now, you're welcome to come to lying down. Get comfortable, and as you get comfortable, notice that very act as your first step in cultivating awareness along this connection of mind and body. In order to get comfortable, your awareness immediately comes into the body and notices how it can adjust its position to become more comfortable, to become more relaxed. So I invite you to do that just now. And perhaps even close your eyes as you get comfortable. By closing the eyes, we further draw the awareness inward, letting go of some of the busyness of the world around us. I would also invite you just now, if you haven't already done so, to turn off your cell phone or to put it on silent, to let go, and let this be a practice for yourself. As your eyes drift closed and your body comes into a more relaxed and comfortable state, let your awareness come to land upon the sensation of your breath. Notice your breath just now, for the first time, perhaps today or in a while. Notice its natural flow and the way it knows what to do all on its own. Notice its natural rhythm and rise and fall. And let the breath now begin to come more deeply and slowly, both in and out through your nose. As you do so, notice and savor every aspect of the breath. The way it draws in through the nose and is warmed as it travels down the throat, filling the lungs. The way the chest and the belly expand with that inhale. And the sense of release and letting go as the shoulders fall with the exhale. The chest and the belly release. Savor every aspect of the breath as if savoring a bite of your favorite food. Let that breath come more deeply and slowly yet. With your next inhale, filling the lungs all the way to brimming, even taking an extra little sip of air at the top of the inhale, like filling a jug of water all the way to the brim. And with your exhale, equally slowly pouring out every last drop of breath. At the end of the exhale, even slightly engaging the abdominals like squeezing a sponge, wringing out the last few drops. To continue again with the next breath. With this deep, full breath, stretch the edges of your breath, awakening the breath and revitalizing the respiratory system. Notice the way the breath moves through the body. Notice if sitting up a little bit taller would help to make a little bit more room for the breath on that deep inhale. And again, the sense of release and complete letting go with that exhale. Take one more of these deepest, slowest, and fullest breaths yet. Again, filling the lungs all the way to brimming with your inhale. Complete release with the exhale. And then release the technique, resuming a more natural pace of your breath, but still deep and full and slow and in and out through the nose. And I invite you to come to a technique of counting your breath. This can be a helpful technique if you find that the mind tends to wander or still feel busy, which is fine, that's its tendency. If you notice the mind wandering, simply notice that that's happening. You can say to yourself, that's me thinking about whatever it might be. And by simply noticing that you've had the thought, you've taken a step outside of it. And then direct your awareness to come back to your breath. And you can incorporate the technique of counting your breath. As you take your next inhale, count and see whatever number you come to. And then match that number as you exhale. Continue with this technique for several more rounds of breath, counting your inhales and exhales. You might notice as the body relaxes further and the breath further deepens and slows that you can add a count of 1 or 2. This is a wonderful technique for helping to connect the mind with the breath, providing that focal point for the mind to calm the mind and further relax the body. Releasing this technique, let your awareness sink further into the body, noticing the movement of the breath through your core, the movement of the breath through the heart space, the shoulders, your belly and lower back. And know that that breath happens not only in your lungs, but from the lungs the breath is shared with your heart, and from the beating of your heart is shared with every muscle, organ, and cell in your body. And so you can quite literally breathe into the soles of your feet, the palms of your hands, your arms, your legs. Explore this flow of the breath through your body, your being, letting your awareness now drop down to the soles of your feet. Imagine the flow of the breath down the legs into the tips of your toes. Feel the sensation of your feet inside your shoes and against the ground beneath you. And let your feet and your legs relax into that support of the ground beneath you with the flow of your breath. Let your awareness in the breath now flow up from the feet, spilling over the knees into the thighs. Notice the sensation of your legs against the chair beneath you or the ground beneath you. Notice its gentle pressure pressing back up against you to support you and hold you right where you are. With your next breath, let the legs relax into that support. Draw your awareness and your breath now up from the legs, through your hips. Feel your sit bones against the chair or the ground beneath you. And from the hips, let the awareness and the breath flow into the belly and your lower back. Feel the belly relax as the breath flows through that gentle rise and fall of the belly. Let the lower back relax into the support of the chair or the ground beneath you. Notice the easy flow of the breath through your lower back as well. Let your awareness in the breath flow up from the space of your belly and your lower back to the space of your heart and shoulders. Be aware of the flow of the breath through this space, the rise and fall of the shoulders, the slight movement of the shoulders against the chair or the ground beneath you. Feel the shoulders further relax with each exhale. Notice too if there's any resistance within the body or the flow of the breath. Feel free to make adjustments of your posture or your body to further facilitate the breath. Sitting up taller with the inhale if needed. With your next breath, let your awareness flow down the arms, from the shoulders, through the elbows to the palms of your hands. Notice the arms as an extension of this space of the heart, not just anatomically, but energetically. When our hearts feel the need to protect itself, as when we feel the sensation of fear or anger or hurt, our hands might close into fists, or our arms might cross in front of our bodies. In the same way, when our hearts open with a sensation of love or friendship or compassion, so too might our hands and our arms open to lend a helping hand or to embrace another. As your awareness in your breath flows down through the arms into the palms of your hands, let your hands open into a gentle sense of opening to both give and receive of your heart's energy. Let your awareness in the breath flow up from the space of the heart and the shoulders through the neck, through the space of the jaw and into your facial expression itself. Let your facial expression melt into one of ease and restfulness. Relaxing the forehead, the eyebrows, and the eyelids. Relax your jaw and even the tongue. I invite you to take a deep and cleansing breath just now. Inhale as if you're yawning and stretch the jaw wide. And exhale with a sigh of relief. Let's do that again. With your next inhale, yawn and stretch the jaw wide. And as you exhale, take an audible sigh of relief. Once more, inhale, yawn, stretch the jaw, and exhale. Good. And resume a normal breath in and out through the nose. And let your awareness and the breath flow into the mind itself, as if the mind too were a muscle you could simply relax. Let the breath flow through the mind itself, like a refreshing breeze on a sunny day. Any stray thoughts still lingering in the mind might be like a single cloud on that otherwise sunny day. And just as you'll notice the thought as it drifts through your mind, like you might notice that cloud drift or change shape. But eventually that cloud might drift and dissolve away on the breeze. And so too may your thoughts dissolve upon the flow of your breath. Coming back to the simple sensation of the flow of your breath through your entire mind and body. Let yourself simply be in this moment with the flow of your breath, the sensation of your being. Notice this sense of presence, connectedness, ease, and relaxation which you have cultivated within yourself, simply by connecting the awareness of your mind with the sensations of your breath and your body. Know that this sense of ease is yours to take with you throughout your day and your life. As you slowly open your eyes, I invite you to take this connection with your breath, your sense of ease, with you. I thank you for sharing in this practice in Session 1 of the Awareness Program. We look forward to being with you next time. Take care.